അമേരിക്കയുടെ തലസ്ഥാനമായ വാഷിംഗ്ടൺ DC-യിലെ ജോർജ് ടൗൺ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയുടെ വാൾഷ് സ്കൂൾ ഓഫ് ഫോറിൻ സർവീസിലെ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളുമായുള്ള രാഹുൽ ഗാന്ധിയുടെ ഇൻട്രാക്ഷന്റെ ഒന്നാം ഭാഗമാണ് ഇത്. അമേരിക്കയിലെ 439 നാഷണൽ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റികളിൽ 22ാം സ്ഥാനത്ത് നിൽക്കുന്ന യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയാണ് ജോർജ് ടൗൺ. ഇവിടുത്തെ സ്കൂൾ ഓഫ് ഫോറിൻ സർവീസ് ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റ് ഫോറിൻ പോളിസി റാങ്കിങ്ങിൽ ലോകത്ത് 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്താണ്. അതായത് ഫോറിൻ പോളിസിയിൽ ലോകത്തെ ഏറ്റവും മികച്ച വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾ പഠിക്കുന്ന സ്കൂളാണ് ഇതെന്ന് അർത്ഥം. അത്രയും ഉന്നത സ്ഥാനത്ത് നിൽക്കുന്ന വിദ്യാഭ്യാസ സ്ഥാപനത്തിലെ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളുമായി സംവദിക്കണമെങ്കിൽ അത്ര വിവേകമുള്ള ആർട്ടിക്കുലേറ്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള വ്യക്തിയായിരിക്കണം എന്ന് സാരം. ആദ്യ ഭാഗത്തിൽ 2024 ലോക്സഭാ ഇലക്ഷൻ ഇന്ത്യയിലുണ്ടാക്കിയ മാറ്റത്തെക്കുറിച്ചാണ് സംസാരിക്കുന്നത്. അദ്ദേഹം വളരെ വ്യക്തതയോടെ കാര്യങ്ങളെക്കുറിച്ച് സംസാരിക്കുന്നത് വിവേകമുള്ള എല്ലാവരെയും വളരെയേറെ സ്വാധീനിക്കും എന്നുള്ളതിൽ തർക്കമില്ല. BJPയുടെ ഫേക്ക് ന്യൂസ് ഫാക്ടറിയെ തകർക്കണമെങ്കിൽ സത്യം എല്ലാവരിലേക്കും എത്തേണ്ടത് അത്യാവശ്യമാണ്. അതിനാൽ ദയവായി കഴിയുന്നവരെല്ലാം വീഡിയോ മുഴുവനായി കാണുകയും ചാനൽ സബ്സ്ക്രൈബ് ചെയ്യാത്തവർ സബ്സ്ക്രൈബ് ചെയ്യുകയും പരമാവധി ആളുകളിലേക്ക് ഈ വീഡിയോ ഷെയർ ചെയ്യുകയും ചെയ്യണമെന്ന് അഭ്യർത്ഥിക്കുന്നു. ഇതിൻ്റെ ബാക്കിയുള്ള ഭാഗങ്ങൾ റിലീസ് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ അതും കാണാൻ മറക്കരുതേ.
Al, it's a great pleasure to be here with Rahul Gandhi and with a not quiet audience. I think we've already discovered a lively audience. And there's a lot to discuss. I'll just keep a vague eye on the time, including the most recent election. But I'd like to start, if I may, with a higher altitude perspective of how we got here. Situation where Modi's still got a third term in spite of having had his wings clipped. How did India reach this situation? The country of pluralism, secularism, your family's great role. What happened in the last 15 years to bring this about?
I mean, I think, first of all, of course, Mr. Modi has a central role in it. But I don't think it's only Mr. Modi. And I also don't think that it started in 2014. The general dynamics, the architecture and the forces that eventually got Mr. Modi are older. They just combined well in 2014. And I think India has had this fight, modern India has had it embedded in it, you know, the fight for and against the constitution. And that's really the heart of it. The idea that all Indians should be equal, all Indians should be valued and treated in the same way versus a hierarchy. And the idea that, you know, there is a hierarchy in India, a caste hierarchy, and that should be defended at all costs. So this is the conflict, and it's not a new conflict. I mean, if you go back in Indian history, you can go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, you'll see this conflict. And there it's a philosophical battle, and then it has its political structures. So
your family, I mean, I know everybody here will know, but it bears repeating. Your father was Prime Minister, your grandmother, Indira Gandhi, was Prime Minister, your great-grandfather, Jawaharlal Nehru, was leader of the independence movement and the first Prime Minister of post-colonial India, the greatest and the longest-serving Prime Minister. And your great-great-grandfather, Motilal Nehru, was obviously co-founder of Congress and therefore of the independence movement. There's nobody better than you, and looking back at your family history and at the sort of dramatic saga of India post-independence and pre-independence, to sort of stand back and ask, well, were there moments where, because your party was so much the natural party of government, that it became complacent, that it wittingly or unwittingly helped pave the way for this extraordinary period of Hindutva, which we'll get onto in a moment, may be receding, may or may not be receding, but is the self-analysis Congress should do, even now, to figure out how we got here?
No, look, politics ebbs and flows, and it's a contest, it's a competition, and you go up and down in that competition, and that's just part of it. I think the way I view it, that this has given us and the India alliance as a whole a lot of space to think about how we go forward. I think the politics in India has fundamentally changed, and so from our perspective, what we see, and some people would agree and some people would disagree, but what we see is that there's a clash of visions. We don't agree with Mr. Modi's vision. We fight it. And for us, we are trying to now put in place the basic foundation, the basic building block of a new vision for the country. And The Congress party has periodically done this. If you look at the Congress party and you compare it to other political parties, it has this ability to reinvent itself, right? So you look at the 70s, the Congress party nationalizes the banks, and then it does a complete U-turn in the 90s, and then is going with liberalization, with open economic architecture. So I think there's a design element in the Congress party that has been put in place by Mahatma Gandhi, and it has certain qualities as a political organization which are very powerful. I mean, I was watching the elections, and there was a point in the elections when we sat down with our treasurer, and he was saying, look, the bank accounts are frozen. Now, how are you supposed to fight an election if your bank accounts? And so we were like, okay, we're done. That was the reaction, and we really didn't have an answer. But then the Congress party fought an election with their bank accounts frozen and has basically destroyed the idea of Modi. So it has. And you can see it because when you see the Prime Minister now in Parliament, and I come face to face with him, he's psychologically trapped. And he basically cannot come to terms. He cannot understand how this has happened. For me, sitting in the Congress party and watching it is quite an amazing thing because it's a political party, but then it's a whole set of ideas. And now looking back, I realized that the Congress party fought the British Empire. And there's a reason the thing survived that. And it's in the basic architecture of the party. Now, sometimes the party goes away from that architecture. So I differentiate between the Congress idea, the Congress philosophy, value system, and party organization. And they don't necessarily 100% overlap. But when they start coming close, then it starts to become very powerful.
Okay, let's get into the election. I mean, as you say, it was not fought on a level playing field. I think it's fair to, with your frozen bank accounts, what's happened to my profession, the media in India, is quite dramatic. Restrictions. And of course, you had a prime minister who was expecting not just a hat-trick, not just a third consecutive victory, but to lift his majority from what, I think it was 303 he had in the last Lok Sabha out of 543, a clear majority, to 370 up to 400, a super majority. And in the event, gets 240. Now, with your bank accounts frozen and the media playing field not being level and all the rest, how do you explain this? Is this because you formed this India alliance and had essentially power sharing of who ran where? Is it because the fruits of growth really weren't trickling down to most Indians in what is objectively a very high growing economy? Or was it a more principled thing, backlash against Hindu nationalism? Was it all of these or something I haven't mentioned?
Multiple things came together, right? So, for example, prior to the election, we kept stressing on the idea that the institutions have been captured. And whenever we'd go, India Alliance would go, we'd stress on this idea that, look, the institutions are captured and we don't have a fair playing field. The education system is captured by the RSS. The media system is captured. The investigative agencies are captured. And we kept saying this, and people were not quite getting it. And we would keep saying it again and again and again. And somehow they were just not getting it. And we couldn't understand why. Because we were like, it's obvious to us, it's obvious to them, and something wasn't working. And then in one meeting, one of the people who works with us said, listen, try holding up the Constitution. And so I started holding up the Constitution. And everything we had said suddenly just exploded. So India realized in this election, and really, I mean, not to divide it so crudely, but poor India, disenfranchised India, oppressed India, it understood that if the Constitution goes, the whole game is gone. And so that was the first sort of, I saw it. There was a shockwave that when I would hold up the Constitution, it would go. Like I could see the shockwave going, that people are like, oh yeah. And then people started coming to me, when you're in these meetings, you'll start hearing from the side that, they'll bring a Constitution or they'll start saying it. So what was very interesting to me was poor people deeply understood that now this was a fight between those who are protecting the Constitution and those who want to destroy. So that was one very strong element. There was also the caste census issue that became big. And that's a fundamental question in India. Share, what you say in Hindi, bhagidari, of the institutions, the structure, the power of the Indian state. So these things suddenly started to come together. And at some level, I was frankly blown away by the wisdom of India. I would sometimes sit there and say, this is quite amazing. There was like a wall that suddenly arrived and said, okay, we are not backing down.